Good morning, everyone, and welcome to this very long-awaited knowledge gathering. My name is Sofia Larsson, and I'm a software developer here at 1337. I'm very interested in questions related to sustainability, and especially what the software industry can do to get our environmental impact to a minimum. Because, all the amazing software solutions that we have built have a carbon footprint that equals the size of the entire world's aviation industry. And I believe that I share this interest with a lot of you who are watching this. And I think that you too want to make an impact for the good of our planet and for everyone who's living on it. And so usually when I talk to people in our industry about this, their first reaction is like, okay, wow, but so in my role as a software developer, designer, or a leader, what can I do? Like, where do I even start? Do you have any examples of someone who has done it before? And I'm like, well, I don't know. But today we want to answer that question. So that's why we've invited a very special guest. Or actually, this is about two special guests that we have joining us today. But now, before we begin, these types of sessions, which we call knowledge gatherings, are a chance for us to be able to bring some knowledge to you in the mornings. So if you want to catch this again later or send it to someone else, it will be up on our YouTube channel, along with all of the other guests that we have had joining us. So we had like Troy Hunt and Bas Cheekstra, just to name a couple. So what's going to happen now is that our guest is going to treat us with a presentation for about 35 to 40 minutes. And after that, I'm going to bring in our CTO, Martin Mazur, into the discussion. And as we go along today, there's a chance for you to ask questions. So just pop them in the chat and we'll try to answer as many as we can as we go along. So let's kick off. And I want to introduce you to our very special guest. We're joined by Drew Engelson, who is the Director of Engineering at Starbucks. I first saw Drew at the AWS reInvent conference late last year, where AWS presented their sustainability pillar. And so Drew was there and gave a talk about sustainability at Starbucks. And so here we are today because I was so excited to hear more from his journey and his experience. So yeah, let's bring him in. Good morning, Drew.
Good morning, Sophia. Thank you for having me.
Good morning or good night, maybe, because what's the time over there?
I was going to say, you said knowledge sharing in the morning. It's just after midnight, my time in Seattle.
Yeah. Okay. We're so grateful that you stayed up and joined us. But fantastic. So what's going to happen now is Drew is going to treat us with his presentation. So just grab a coffee and listen and send in questions that you might have. Okay? Good. So with that said, I'm going to leave it over to you, Drew.
Thank you very much. And just make sure those coffees you grab are from Starbucks. Thank you very much for having me tonight or this morning. When I encountered Sophia's actually presentation from last November, I was inspired by the culture of continuous learning and sharing of knowledge that I saw at 1337. So I'm very happy to be here. Thank you all for joining today. And I appreciate you all spending the time with me, and I look forward to this conversation. So based on the topic itself, I suspect that many watching are already, they already believe that saving our planet is an important thing to do. So I won't spend much time convincing you of that fact. Instead, we'll primarily focus on our industry and our roles within it. So Are you a sustainable technologist? By the end of this session, I'd like you all to feel confident answering this question for yourself. Or rather, this is really not a question at all, but a challenge I would like us all to take on. So let me start by introducing myself. And I think it's important to point out that I am not on a sustainability team. I don't have sustainability anywhere in my job description. I am an engineer, just like many of you. My job is to build things with software or support my teams in doing so. I grew up in the suburbs of New York City, studied philosophy at the university, and then landed in Washington, D.C., where I spent many years as an engineer and manager at the Public Broadcasting Service, or PBS. This is the public television network in the United States. PBS is an organization that exists for the greater good. There is no advertising or corporate influence. We were mostly funded by public donations with a very, and I mean very, limited tech budget. We were expected to compete with other broadcasters and streamers like HBO, CNN, and BBC. Netflix was sending DVDs in the mail in those days. It was here at PBS where I learned of the importance of frugality in software engineering, and that has stuck with me ever since. We needed to get very creative, finding clever ways to achieve outsized results. In fact, some of the techniques we relied on then have come full circle and are part of greening up the internet. Static site generation, for example. We couldn't afford enough servers to handle all the traffic if the web pages we were creating were generated dynamically. TV schedules, for example, those only change about once a day. So we would every morning have scripts running that generate static HTML files for the TV schedules for all of our local stations. I really love the mission and values of the company, but then I went into consulting afterwards, like many of you, and spent most of that time working with National Geographic, another mission-oriented organization that I absolutely love. And then 4 years ago, with my wife and 2 daughters, I moved to beautiful, sunny Seattle to be surrounded by water, evergreen trees, and mountains. We settled on an island across the sound from downtown Seattle, primarily so that I would not need to drive anywhere. I ride my bike onto a ferry each day to get to work and back home again. This ferry is scheduled to become all electric within the next 2 years. In my personal life, my family does as much as we can to live sustainably. We had put solar panels on our house. We use water barrels. We compost as much as possible. I drive an electric car when I have to drive, but as I said, I mostly bike everywhere. We started homesteading. We have beehives, chickens, and my kids grow tons of strawberries. And I always bring my own cups to get my morning matcha latte at Starbucks. So for work, I was searching for another mission-oriented company and stumbled across an opportunity at Starbucks. So this photograph is our very first Starbucks store in Pike Place Market in Seattle. It looks quite romantic, but in reality, this is a lot more what you find when you visit. There is always a line out the door, crowds taking photographs. It's clear that people just love Starbucks. Yes, we sell a lot of coffee, but coffee is not what brings these crowds. They just love the Starbucks brand and what it stands for. They want a piece of it. So as I investigated this company, I discovered something very special. This is not just some corporate behemoth out to maximize profits. Starbucks is truly also a mission-driven company, focused on people and planet, and believes that that will yield higher profits in the long term. It is a greater good, and I was sold. So our mission statement is this: to inspire and nurture the human spirit, one person, one cup, and one neighborhood at a time. long legacy of achievements in sustainability, having made many big investments over the years. I won't read all of these, but here are a few of my personal favorites. In 1985, we were one of the very first to offer a discount to bring in a reusable cup. And that's just 1 year after we actually began selling coffee in cups. Prior to that, we only sold bagged beans of coffee. In the year 2008, LED bulbs didn't feel very warm and cozy. They had a very cold feeling. So we worked with General Electric to develop a bulb that did feel warm and appropriate for our stores. And then we put it in all of our stores. In 2019, we updated our cold drink lids to eliminate the need for straws, reducing overall plastic by 9% and increasing the recyclability. Last September, Starbucks was recognized by the US Environmental Protection Agency as a green power leader for using 100% renewable energy in our company-owned stores. And if you've ever walked past a very busy Starbucks, like those in business and tourist districts, you've likely noticed the unfortunate sight of garbage cans overflowing with our iconic white cups. Recently, we announced a goal to end single-use cups within the next 2 years. In fact, this photo is one of the reusable cups that are experimentally in place at the Starbucks store located within our headquarters and a few other test markets. So let me lay out some of the logic that lights my fire. The internet is a filthy place. Okay, I see a lot of people nodding. You have filthy minds. We're talking about greenhouse gas emissions, obviously. As Sofia said, the internet accounts for roughly 7% of global emissions, and this number is growing. But that's not necessarily a bad thing. This number is bigger than the global commercial aviation industry, which is frequently targeted as a climate problem area. Our industry is bigger, but is not in the climate spotlight yet. Of course, we need to consider the utility of these industries, which is actually quite high, of course, but still, change is needed everywhere we can get it. 2, Starbucks has a large and growing digital presence. The system we operate in is dirty, and we are constantly consuming more of it. Thirdly, our leadership routinely highlights the importance of becoming planet positive. Here's a quote from our former CEO, Kevin Johnson. I don't have a snappy quote yet from our current CEO, Howard Schultz. So again, building the argument, the internet is dirty. We use lots of internet. Becoming planet positive is very important. I'm led to this one conclusion. We can and must do better. And when I talk internally in our company, Starbucks Technology has a unique opportunity to be an industry-leading voice in digital sustainability. So with all of that in mind, I started to ask myself, what is the environmental impact of our systems? The questions I set out to answer are, what is the carbon footprint of the systems my teams build and are responsible for? Can and should we be doing better? And what metrics might we be looking at as we think about reducing our impact? So let me take a quick pivot and look at what my teams do. So this should look familiar to many in North America. My teams don't actually build the Starbucks app itself. There's a separate team for that. But this app is powered by several domains of Several years ago, I had the great fortune to support my teams in rebuilding these engines from scratch. A big bet to bring these critical systems in-house and into the cloud, increasing resiliency, scalability, and security. It was a greenfield opportunity to design and deliver the next generation cloud-native loyalty and commerce platforms. Now some fodder for the cloud nerds among us. These engines run in AWS. We use an event-driven microservice architecture based on reactive principles and CQRS, or Command Query Responsibility Separation. Requests come in, are handed off to Kafka, then processed asynchronously wherever possible. This allows us to scale up to handle the massive traffic we see every day, but also enables us to do finely tuned optimizations. Now, back to carbon footprinting for a second, and let me explain why this is so important to me. I, like so many others, joined Starbucks because we believe deeply in our mission and values, and personally, doubly so for planet positivity. Yet I felt a gap existed between our mission and our day-to-day work in technology. So I set out to find that connection, to build a bridge for myself and others to feel more fulfilled, to be connected with the greater good. So first, I connected with the Starbucks Global Sustainability team. They're responsible for calculating the carbon footprint across every part of our business, and I learned some interesting data points. First, they use a coarse spend-based model for estimating annual carbon emissions. This is necessary at this global scale in which they operate and the relative infrequency that reports are delivered. I also learned that over 20% of our global carbon footprint comes from dairy, and less than 1% is attributed to technology. So my key takeaways. First, I put oat milk in my lattes from now on. Number two, technology has a very low impact by comparison. Three, while the impact seems low, 1% is still a very large number and we have room to improve. Four, leveraging technology is a great way to unlock emission reductions elsewhere in the business. For example, if we automate certain manual paperwork, the tech footprint goes up, but the overall carbon footprint is decreased. Number five, the annual spend-based model works well for annual reporting, but it just isn't granular or timely enough for us to make optimizations, test those changes, and iterate. I still had this vision of a dashboard showing our environmental impact data in near real time. So we attempted to build one. During one of our hack weeks, I partnered with our sustainability team and we tried to answer these questions by analyzing our AWS usage data. But how? At the time, I didn't have direct access to carbon emissions data from AWS. We needed to produce an algorithm based on proxy metrics. The two metrics I settled on were cloud costs and normalized usage hours. We made many assumptions and educated guesses. We knew from the beginning that the results would be directional at best. But it was a start, and directional is perfectly okay. In an attempt to gamify greener engineering practices, we created a greener score, which is an amalgam of these proxy metrics, plus adjustments for more nuanced factors. For example, I added points for running in regions with a higher percentage of renewable energy. The dashboard showed how our efficiency progressed over time. Perhaps more importantly, we built a recommendation engine to highlight opportunities for further increasing efficiency and reducing our carbon footprint. The outcome of this experiment revealed that we became much more efficient month over month in the year 2000. Footprint was reduced by 32% over that time period. Our cloud costs were also reduced by a similar margin. Now keep in mind, all the while during that time period, we were rolling out new services and handling more transactions than ever. We had several record-breaking mobile order days in late 2020. Over that year, our loyalty program grew by nearly 20%. At the beginning of 2020, our commerce engine was live in only 50 stores, but by September, actually, we rolled out to every store in North America. So if we did some math, the per transaction impact actually dropped by orders of magnitude. By the way, we internally socialized this reduction around last year's Earth Day, and in response, our Chief Sustainability Officer, Michael Kabori, pointed out that decoupling business growth from our carbon footprint is exactly the challenge we face. In the cloud, we had significant business growth, yet reductions in cost and carbon. That's a true win-win. But I still wasn't sure if our findings were legit. So a few months ago, as Sofia pointed out, at reInvent in December, Amazon launched a few sustainability-related tools, one of which was the Customer Carbon Footprint tool, which provides actual carbon results and carbon data based on usage. Well, as I expected, the curves directionally matched our hack project findings, but the actuals were a whole order of magnitude lower. Additionally, it showed that our actual carbon cloud footprint reduction was not 30-something%, it was closer to 50%. And while that line sort of flattens out, keep in mind that the business growth on the platform experienced was tremendous during that time period. There was continual optimization going on during those later months. To gain more perspective, we went and met with the AWS sustainability team. We had previously done the normal well-architected review several times in the past and knew we were fairly well architected. This time, we focused exclusively on sustainability, which was a new pillar that was launched at reInvent last December as well. What we learned is we were pretty green. A lot of those optimizations for performance and cost translate directly to carbon reductions. We also found some new opportunities. So let's take a look back at what drove some of these efficiencies. Well, I think at first we were efficient by design. Cloud native is just cleaner, reportedly up to 88% cleaner than traditional data centers. Microservices densely packed by Kubernetes yield higher utilization of underlying EC2 nodes. In fact, I've recently seen some Kubernetes schedulers that are carbon aware, automatically placing workloads in the greenest regions available at the time. We use binary protocols like gRPC, which is a very efficient way of messaging between systems. Many of our services are written officially in Scala. We right-size everything all the time. We're generally obsessive about optimizing infrastructure. We tighten up our auto-scaling. By examining our Datadog metrics, we found that our Kubernetes services were reserving more CPU than needed, and in some cases, we were able to reduce virtual CPU cores by 70%. We looked for underutilized and unused resources and simply eliminated them. Right-sizing underutilized resources, no matter what workload, there's generally an EC2 instance sized just for that. We started to scale down non-production off hours, which cut about 5% out of our total EC2 usage. We focused on storage lifecycle management. Let's not keep backups longer than we need to keep them. We should examine our retention policies and tune auto deletion and lifecycle rules for these assets. So while cost and general efficiency had given us a great start, there were some less obvious drivers of impact reduction. So while we know that AWS is committed to 100% renewable energy by 2025, so on one hand, you might say, well, we can just wait a few more years and we'll be 100% green, right? Well, number one, we don't have time to wait. Currently, some regions are further along that journey than others and are affected by the mix of local energy sources, which means that some regions are greener than others and have basically lower carbon footprints for services running there. So in those regions where the grid has a higher percentage of renewable energy and/or AWS has announced renewable energy projects, we tend to run services in those regions. AWS constantly releases new instance types, which are generally more efficient. In some cases, cost being even, we converted some workloads to ARM and Graviton instances, which were significantly more efficient than their predecessors. We use a lot of spot instances, which is interesting because we're still consuming the same CPU, the same instance that we might have if it was on demand. But by doing so, we allow the cloud provider to get higher utilization of their resources and using their excess capacity. It prevents them from having to continually grow and purchase new hardware to support their peaks. We also started to add jitter to our scheduled jobs. For example, if everyone runs backups at the top of the hour, which is generally a default schedule, the cloud provider must be able to scale to meet that peak. Since the specific matter generally doesn't matter to us, we just need to make sure it runs hourly. So when we consider our digital ecosystem, there are so many opportunities for teams to optimize their carbon budgets. We should look at which on-premise workloads can move to the cloud. Again, potentially 88% lower carbon emissions. Within the cloud, look for low CO2 regions. Remove unused resources, right-size resources, scale to match demand, leverage excess capacity, use newer instance types. If we look at the network, which is in between our servers and the end users, we want to optimize data transfer across those networks. We can make fewer calls with tools like GraphQL. We can make calls smaller using gzip or zstd. Shorter calls by moving the source closer to the user and optimizing call patterns. End user devices are the most fun to look at from my perspective because there are so many different options. We can reduce page weight, reduce CPU usage, lazy load expensive assets, make it responsive so mobile phones are not getting images that are sized for big screens. Smart using of caching and search engine optimization by getting people to the content they're looking for. If someone hits your site and lands on a page, you get it. You get a page view, but if the user leaves, that was a wasted page view and a wasted energy cycle. Consider dark mode. Many screens use more energy to display certain bright colors. Dark mode is an interesting option to combat that. If anyone looks at their web analytics, you will find a significant percentage of your traffic comes from bots. Some bots are healthy bots, like search engine spiders. Some bots are not so healthy. I say block the bots. And for those bots that you want to come, give them some directions on how often they should come back and visit. For sites that don't change very frequently, well, maybe once a month is often enough. We should also reconsider our vendor contracts, like maybe favor green companies, put contract language that requires disclosure of green practices by these vendors, engage with the industry. The key takeaway here is that no matter where you work, your job function, or at what level, you are paid to make decisions. Big decisions, small decisions, it does not matter. You have an opportunity to bring carbon awareness to those decisions. Some other hot topics to keep our eyes on, like things to look at, are AIML, blockchain, crypto, NFTs, IoT. Each of these has the ability to use a lot of energy and potentially have a negative impact if not managed thoughtfully. However, I think it's very important that we don't automatically dismiss these as inherently bad. For example, NFTs are notoriously on the environmental naughty list. They're responsible for a tremendous amount of energy use only for the benefit of a privileged few. Rather than saying that NFTs are evil and walking away, let's participate in the conversation and look for opportunities to make them greener and more inclusive. I think we have enough polarization in the world as it is. So there are so many tools being created to help us. Website Carbon, EcoPing, and EcoGrader are a few that come to mind. While the cloud providers all offer carbon data now, the data is not always as granular or timely as we'd like. Cloud Carbon Footprint from the ThoughtWorks Green team is a great open source tool for understanding cloud carbon usage in near real time and in a cloud agnostic fashion. Safari developer tools and even standard optimization tools like Lighthouse offer valuable insights. We can discover green hosting options and ways to carbon optimize a web page. Like as we said, reducing the size of a few images, eliminating unneeded JavaScript or lazy loading, and certainly not auto-playing videos. These reduce network traffic and the CPU needed for a user's device to load that page. You know when your laptop's fan starts cranking while loading a web page? That's your computer saying, "Help, I'm burning up." Let's try and avoid that. Some of these optimizations may seem negligible, but even those small tweaks can have a very measurable impact at scale. Think about how many users use the Starbucks app. Small changes there, minimal reductions in their network traffic have massive differences at scale. It's not only greener, but it's likely to create a snappier user experience. So I'd really love if we all started to factor carbon as a cost in the total cost of ownership. If you're familiar with the term TCO or total cost of ownership, it really refers to the overall ongoing cost of a product, right? There's a cost to build it. There's a cost to operate it. There's people that are responsible for maintaining it. There's cost involved in the servers and the network traffic and keeping the lights on and acquiring customers. Like these are all costs that factor into the total cost of ownership. And as we include carbon in there, I like to call that TCO2 or total cost of ownership with CO2. I suppose that's technically TC203, but that's not nearly as catchy, so I'll go with TCO2. I truly consider carbon to be a cost that we need to optimize for, just like euros. In our case, we were already optimizing for cost and then visualized our environmental impact afterwards. But then we went back and looked at the carbon accounting and we sought to improve our carbon balance sheet. But here's an interesting thought experiment. What if we set cost aside and focused exclusively on reducing our carbon footprint? What decisions might we make differently? How would our products be different than they are today? You know that sort of locked triangle. You can have good, fast, or cheap, but you can't have all three at the same time. Where does carbon fit into that? Is it another node? Is it like now a square, or is it like another dimension, like a three-sided pyramid? Or what if we just drop one of those nodes altogether and put carbon in its place? I like to imagine that will help drive greener products, greener engineering practices, and sometimes not at the expense of those other three elements, just by simply educating ourselves and deciding to do it. So rather than leaving you with a list of useful resources, I thought I'd highlight some inspiring people. You might consider following them. Well, the top row are people I encountered through the amazing climateaction.tech community, a thriving Slack community where green technologists come together and share ideas and co-create. Chris Adams is from the Green Web Foundation and an organizer of climateaction.tech, very active in that community. Tom Greenwood looks giddy holding his book, Sustainable Web Design. I have that book on hand at almost all times. It's kind of like my skinny Bible of sustainable ideas, and it's a good reminder to me that this is something we need to consider at all times. In fact, I've given a copy of that book to every single person on my team at Starbucks. Asim Hussein is evangelist at Microsoft and with the Green Software Foundation, always coming up with great ideas and inspiring to me. And there's Dryden, builder of EcoPing, and is generally very insightful. And I don't want to forget Sandra, Melissa, and Heather, also organizers of the CAT community. And the bottom row, as Sofia mentioned, are those who I had the opportunity and luxury to co-present alongside at AWS reInvent. We have Adrian from Amazon and Margaret and Stefan from AWS. We talked about sustainable architecture at reInvent, much of which was led into this particular presentation. Getting to know these three during the planning process was truly enlightening, and it really shaped my thoughts on these subjects. So back to our original question or challenge. Are you a sustainable technologist? I firmly believe that in a few years, we will all be sustainable technologists because our businesses will demand it, whether by choice or by regulation. So right now we have an opportunity or perhaps an obligation to take the reins and get ahead of that curve. Let's educate ourselves and decide to factor carbon into our engineering decisions. Understanding the trade-offs, big and small. Consider carbon in your calculations, whether in designing a new product or optimizing existing workloads. Here are some ideas to get this started in your organizations. Get some data. Baseline your current impact. It's not easy to measure carbon directly, so take your best guess and use proxy metrics like cost and instance hours. Consider including green goals in every project, or at least prioritize efficiently. Define green non-functional requirements. Make sure you include carbon in your total cost of ownership. Accelerate migration to the cloud. Identify green hosts. Target low-hanging fruit because even the small things will add up, and it sure feels good. As I mentioned before, a lot of the optimization work that engineers already do, whether it be for cost or performance, generally is greener. So let's take a look back and see where we might have had wins and we didn't know it. Let's celebrate those wins. Develop green champions within your organization. This is a subject that gets people excited. Let's just talk to each other and work on a project, co-create. Get something started within your company. And build awareness. Hold brown bags or learning labs. Make sure to share wins and ideas with peers in our community. Go out and speak publicly, like I'm doing right now. There can be nothing proprietary here. We all need to do this together, since we're all on this together. Thank you for hearing me out. Let's do this because we really can. Thanks for listening.
Wow. Thank you so much, Drew. There are so many interesting things to discuss here. So now after Drew has held his fantastic presentation, Martin Mazur, the CTO of 3037, is going to be joining us and have a discussion before we open up to all of your questions and an answer session. So still, if you have questions or thoughts during our discussion, just pop all of them in the comment bar and we'll try to answer as many as we can. So let's welcome Martin Mazur. Good morning, Martin.
Good morning, Sophia. Good evening, Drew. Thanks for a great presentation. I mean, that was you truly ended on an inspiring note, right? It's a true call to action.
Thank you very much for having me.
Yeah, really. So I thought we would kick this discussion off with a simple, but not so simple to answer question. So what can we as software professionals do to incorporate sustainability in our daily work while building products. So what do you think, Drew? What's the what's the easiest fix?
I think the very first thing is just to educate ourselves, right? Really get a good understanding of, the products that we build and are responsible for, like, where does it consume energy and what is the source of that energy in the first place? Only once we have a sense for that and really recognize that the the work that we do does have a carbon impact, only then can we start thinking about, well, let's optimize for that. Let's make simple decisions. And I think even things like, and as I said before, no matter what your job is, there's decisions you're making every day. Even those small decisions, if we factor in, for example, I need to write an SQL query, right? I can write a query that's, gets my job done and delivers the result I want, the performance I'm looking for, but I might be able to make it a little more efficient by maybe adding an index on something, right? And less time spent by that database server responding to that call means less energy consumed by the database server. The little small things multiplied millions and millions of times actually has a very measurable impact.
So now every like performance nerd is going to be like, yes, I have this opportunity. I can blame it all on sustainability. I love it.
And actually, that's a really great point because, there's only, you can only make performance so far and you can only reduce cost so far. I like to use an example internally sometimes when we think about optimizing for cost, right? We can focus on getting costs down, but we can always sell a few more coffees to make up for that difference if we don't, right? But if we let our applications emit more carbon than we might by not optimizing, we can't take that back, right? So it might be even a more compelling argument to do that optimization than performance or cost.
One of the things that kind of strikes me with your presentation, Drew, is, or there's actually two things. Like, one I'm thinking about is just the awareness of where we're going, and I'm kind of equating this to counting calories. If you want to get healthy, if you're not eating, well enough, you're not eating enough food, or you're eating too much food, one of the best things you can do is to start count calories and be like very diligent about it. And of course, like, you don't actually know how many calories an apple has, in the same way you don't actually know how much carbon your piece of software cloud instance is emitting, but the estimates are good enough. And once you've done that for a month or 2 months or 3 months, you know what healthy eating looks like. And that's why I'm thinking, like, number one is to kind of figure out, like you showed, what is the estimate, what's the actual, you know, measurement, or like as close as we can get. And then that starts becoming this sixth sense within you. So like, this technological choice is good versus this technological choice maybe isn't that good. Um, so I think that's one thing that just strikes me about how we could just get better is number one, we need to get aware about, what does good look like. The second thing is, as you've been speaking about this, I see that, you're working in a team which is obviously has a DevOps culture. You have development and operations in one, because you kind of talk about it as one thing. And I think it's easier to do these things if you have that DevOps culture, DevOps mentality, you have those processes in place, and developers are aware of what's going on in the cloud operations side of things, and cloud operations is working together with the developers. So again, cross-functional teams proves important for yet another thing that we've been talking about here. So I see that there's definitely things we can do, and the reason I pick on like the DevOps culture, or pick that thing up, is because if you're working in an agile environment, that's a thing that's up to your team to decide. That's a thing you don't have to ask permission to reorganize or to change. Some of the other things, like, what we measure as an organization, might be things that need to be decided on a higher level and are out of your hands as a technologist.
Mm. Yeah, I was also thinking about like a lot of us that came into this industry, we did it by, like fooling around on the internet, just creating stuff, didn't care about what we were doing. But now we just realized that what we built is actually impacting life on Earth. So, like, what do you think are our moral obligations when we build these things?
Yeah, I think that's a great question to ask. You know, I'm going to answer that a certain way. But I think the critical part is really making sure we, as organizations, can help align with that kind of approach. It's one thing to build something and even build it efficiently, but you know, do we even need to build it in the first place? Is a question we should ask ourselves, right? Um, I've gone down through at some point and shut down all those wacky. I used to build all these little side projects all the time and leave things up there for fun. And I went and shut those things down at some point. They were just wasting space and consuming energy for no reason. No one ever looked at those things. So, we need to kind of look at this same with the same approach in the work that we do. Clean house. Don't leave a mess behind. When we go into something new, do it very deliberately, with all of the things that we need to take very seriously. Um, I firmly believe that, again, carbon being a cost and maybe the most important cost um, that can't be ignored. So it really is just a matter of starting to do this, right? And the more we do it, I don't think anyone disagrees. It's not a bad thing. It's really a matter of where can we get investment to do that. Um, and actually going back a little bit, because when I look at Starbucks for a second, um, I mentioned that our 20% plus of our carbon footprint comes from dairy. If I were the leadership, and I'm not, um, and they were going to make an investment in reducing our overall carbon footprint, like I would say, you know what, you should focus on dairy. Like the big problem, and technology itself has a much smaller, footprint. We won't move the needle as much there. However, um, it doesn't cost much for us to just simply decide to do things. I mean, to Martin's point, especially in a DevOps culture, we can do it because it's what we believe the way work should be done. Um, and it's not a lot more expensive to do some of that stuff, um, especially when you think about it from the beginning, right? Going back and doing optimizations afterwards certainly consumes engineering cycles. Um, so there's a cost there too. Um, is it well worth it? I think so, but we also need to look at where diminishing returns come in.
I love that thing, like, delete your stuff. Because, we work with a lot of big companies, and sometimes you go in and you look at, all this stuff they built, and, some of it is tooling, and it's things that somebody at some point needed, and you go like, what's this? Can we shut it down? It's like, no, no, no. Like, it's very extremely used. Like, by who? Like, oh, I think it's, you know, John who drives the forklift on. It's like it's literally like one person using this thing, but you still can't shut it down. And my point, other than of course there's a sustainability point, it's continuing to cost, continuing to create carbon footprint. It's continuing to cost money, but it's also continuing to cost like people, like because somebody's maintaining that, somebody's thinking about application, somebody's caring about that. So we need to use what we have in a better way, and that goes like across the board. So I think delete your stuff is extremely valuable. And then the kind of the point you made about dairy, Starbucks, I think that's super interesting. Like, one thing I've noticed is that technology has definitely changed since I got into software development. We used to be at this space, like Sofia says, we put stuff online for fun. now we have technology swaying elections. I mean, if we can literally use technology to change the course of democracy, like I'm sure we can use technology to get people to use oat milk. I mean, there are these aspects as well as we as technologists can use some of these ideas to sway choices, sway decisions. Also, it's not just about the footprint we create by putting stuff out there. It's also how can we help people make better choices with the tech we're building, like with the products we're building. And I think that's interesting because now we're talking about, engineers in a broader sense, design engineers, test engineers, product managers, like now everybody can get involved.
That's what's so fun about this topic, I think, because there's something for everyone to do. It's not just like the DevOps people. It's also designers, product specialists, like everyone. So I just love it. That's why. But that thing about
Here's
yeah,
here's
sorry.
just a curveball. Like one thing I was thinking about because like we had this legislative problem with security, with data and data management, and according to me, what solved this with GDPR. Like once you put like a cost to it, like if you don't get your shit straight, this is what it's going to cost you. Like every company was super interested in, what data they kept, how they kept that data. It was well structured. Do we have the processes aligned? Before GDPR, everybody knew this was important. Like if you ask about, was yeah, I know this is important. Like, do we need something similar on environmental impact? Like, so organizations just go like, all right, well, we've known this is important, but now let's start doing stuff. And I'm just as just throwing that out there.
I mean, I suspect that's coming, right? I think that there's not enough will in the world to just do it on our own. I don't believe. Um, and so I suspect that if this is ever going to really be solved, there will need to be some kind of regulation involved. Now, like most industries that get regulated, they want to participate in how it gets regulated. And I think we can only really speak to that, in a sort of coherent way if we are experienced enough in doing it ourselves. We might not be able to solve it ourselves for everybody, but at least we know these are the things that matter. These are the things that help us move the needle within our organizations. This is the kind of regulation that will work, right? And I don't know how far away that is. That's kind of what I meant before by like we're all going to eventually be sustainable technologists by force in some ways. Um, I don't think it's necessarily a bad thing.
Yeah, and we see a lot of numbers coming out from like statistics that customers choose the greener alternative, and like millennials choose jobs at companies that have like sustainability policies. So I'm just thinking if as a business, if you start now, it's going to give you a competitive advantage and not something that you have to just fix afterwards, like with the GDPR, right? So, like, what do you think? Is it something that companies should invest in right now, today?
I definitely believe so, and I think that there's definitely, um, I mean, you see the opposite happening. Certain examples of companies that are, you know, actively destroying the planet, and you see like sort of the public relations disaster that is, and that can easily be avoided with just getting ahead of the game and um, you know, doing the best we can from getting our sustainability goals in order and progress towards them. But we all know that there's dates, there's deadlines involved here, right? Um, you know, according to a lot of these global meetings, like countries have to commit to moving the needle there, and that's going to require some kind of regulation, right? The key point, that Martin and Sofia both you just made is that if there's a cost involved, um, whether that cost is because you will get penalized if you don't, or because your customers want it, right? So there's sort of like a revenue opportunity as well, or again a cost if you don't. Um, those are the things that are ultimately going to drive the big decision makers to take it as seriously as I do, um, and we'll go from there. But I do think that the earlier we all kind of get in this game, um, the more we'll see great successes. And I think every success that we have, if this conversation today leads to one other person in their company to picking this practice up, and helping reduce that company's carbon footprint even by a little bit, like that benefits every single one of us, right? And just think about, if that's multiplied over and over again, and the reductions are bigger and bigger, like, that's why I will shout this to everybody all day long. It's just that important.
I mean, I love the kind of idea of vote with your wallet. I guess that's what we're talking about. Like, is this going to be such a competitive advantage for some companies that you're gonna have to get on board on this? And still I'm kind of hesitant. I think maybe this is why I'm saying, I'm thinking we might need legislation or something to come in and push things down, because my experience is that vote with your wallet only works if the products are comparable. So if there are two products and they're in all other aspects the same, you might pick the one which is environmentally better, unless you have a very strong opinion about the environment. And unfortunately, I think that most people understand it's important, but they don't have that strong opinion. So when they have to choose a product that is, according to them, slightly worse or slightly more expensive, that might not be enough to push it over the edge and push those companies that have bad practices out of business. And when you then do something like GDPR, like a blanket that forces everybody into it, you kind of remove green as a competitive advantage from the market, but it becomes the new default. And at this point where we are, I think the new default is like the only way to go. Like vote with your wallet is going to be too slow. And like I love that the millennials have a different approach to this than the other generations, but they're just not enough in comparison to the world's population.
Yeah. And also, I was thinking about what you said about scaling down, removing things that you don't use, that only John that works the truck uses, or forklift. We definitely have those applications at my customer right now. So yeah, remove those.
Well,
So
the whole question of competitive advantage is an interesting one. I mean, I think it is a competitive advantage, but if I could make my competitors green like me too, I would do that, right?
Mm.
It's necessary. And you go look and see, the example of way back when Volvo created like the seat belts, right? Um, that was a competitive advantage to them. They were going to have fewer deaths in their cars than their competitors. But because it was such a greater good to offer that technology and release the rights to the patent to all the other automakers, like we're all safer as a result, right? And so I think competitive advantage is a driver, um, but how long will that last? I think and I think that it's sort of a driver that is maybe like uninspiring in some ways, right? Because we're the only ones that are this green. Well, that's a bad story in the end. We need everyone else to also do it. Um, So I don't know. I kind of go back and forth on how I think about that one.
I think it's a very interesting kind of example you bring up Volvo and the seatbelt because um, we know we're all dead, or at least our like kids or next generations are dead if we don't kind of deal with climate change. Um, at the other hand, we're not dead in the same way as when we crash our car. So when somebody starts doing seatbelts, like even if there was a car out there which says like, oh no, we're not doing seatbelts, like we don't like that, they would lose all their customers. But if I open a coffee shop and I go like, I'm not doing sustainable beans, like I'm just like whatever, I don't care. It's not like people are gonna go like, that coffee's poisonous. It's just like, whatever. And I think that sense of doom of crashing your car that doesn't really exist in this question, which is kind of part of the problem, right? Like so the sustainability is kind of like, there's sustainability and then there's comfort, and how far outside of comfort am I willing to go to be sustainable? Like how many extra hours am I willing to spend on the train compared to taking the airplane? And all these things kind of play in together. And again, I might be wrong in this, but this is why I think somebody needs to put down the hammer and say like, this is the way it has to be done. You have to do it within X amount of time. And then the engineering teams will also get that on their agenda. It's all awesome doing it as this is our passion project, but once that becomes part of the metrics for our product, now we have to do it.
Mm. So what do you think about then maybe creating like a standard for what green software means? Like would you want to see an authoritative organization in the space that defines it?
Yeah, I think so, and I think we are starting to see that, right? We have the Green Software Foundation, the Green Web Foundation. These are organizations that are really trying to define what this means and what it means to use software in a sustainable way. Sets expectations for organizations that use these. Has you know basically member organizations that are committing to certain goals. It's kind of exactly where it needs to go, and it's starting to go. And I hope more and more companies do start becoming aware and start committing to those organizations. Absolutely.
Yeah,
Mm.
I,
But
I mean, just
yeah, as
yeah.
you both said, you have to first calculate, like show your numbers to then be able to like start reducing them. So it's like an impossible equation if you don't do both.
I mean, just back to your question, Sophia. I mean, for my own sake, I would love that because today, still, the idea of green software, sustainable software, call it what you want, it's a vague idea. Like, we're talking about this because we in our industry want to do better. But in all honesty, I mean, I don't think we really know what better looks like. There's of course the stuff that Drew brought up that we could talk about, but then I also think that we need to look at it as, in security we have these proactive controls. So these are the things we do before, like that go into the engineering process, the development process, and as in contrast to the things that we find out on the pen test. And this is what I think needs to be there as well, because it's one thing kind of measuring stuff afterwards and being like, oh, we need to optimize this or we need to do better. But having those kind of proactive ideas about, how does this look? What are the technological choices going in? Is going to be much better for us as an industry and for the general mindset of software professionals. We're in a creative mindset where we want to build things. So teach me how to build them right from the get-go, because going back and fixing them is always a pain.
Mm. Yeah, so it's like security or accessibility. If it's an afterthought, it's going to be much more expensive. So maybe we should think like that with sustainability as well.
Well, I mean, I did this talk around security, and I was kind of profiling what, the standard software developer or software professional looks compared to the security professional. And like one of the things that is very prevalent in software professional mindset, software developer mindset, is that it's a creator mindset. So you want to create things, and when you're in that creator mode, you need to you need to get your problem solutions from, how do I create better things, and not how do I fix them afterwards. And I think that's just a slight change, but if we could have those, I know some of them exist, so I'm not saying this doesn't exist. I know there exist manuals for, what to think about before you start building, but I think that that's the right approach for the software teams to go in. It's not like, oh, you built something, now you go measure it and try to fix it afterwards. Because as you're pointing out, Sophia, it's always harder as an afterthought. It's not going to be good enough. And if it was upfront, it might have been a design choice as well. We might have decided to not put this on a separate page, or not have this as a separate button, or not include this thing. And those design choices are always better made up front.
Yeah, and actually a good example of that is, and we were running one of our systems, and it was running in the U.S. West 2 region originally, and we have had an assumption that, well, the things that service talks to are happen to live in the East Coast of the U.S. So we made the decision to move the services to the AWS US East 1 region in Northern Virginia, because we expected to see, sort of lower latency between systems. Um, Now, the actual change we saw was, was there but small. Um, and it also turned out that we moved from Oregon, which was one of the cleaner regions from within AWS. It was deemed one of their green regions, to one that was not, um, and probably had a negative impact on our, in fact, definitely had a negative impact on our carbon footprint. Um, Now that was all done before we were looking at making these calculations, and that's an example of where, that trade-off I would look at it very differently, had we been considering, the carbon cost in that particular case. Now that being said, the Virginia regions actually had tremendous investment from AWS over the last several years, so it's actually, I think, also considered one of their better regions now as well.
Mm. And I'm just thinking about myself, but like as a consumer that cares about sustainability, like if I had that choice, like would you want like 1 second delay, or do you want to emit a lot of, yeah, carbon into the atmosphere? I would choose the delay option. Like if I could choose between those, I would pick the greener alternative.
It's interesting to give the consumer the choice, right? And then you see like the dark mode option on different systems. You consumer can choose, dark or not. Now,
Mm.
I don't know if they frequently realize why they might want to choose dark or not, um, but at least it's their choice, right? And as soon as I realized that that was a thing, I run everything in dark mode now automatically, right? And as far as I'm concerned, the internet is all pages are black now. I kind of forgot that they don't exist the other way.
Yeah, it's not
Yeah,
super obvious that that's the green alternative.
yeah, exactly.
Well, welcome to the dark side. I mean, we cool kids. We've been doing dark mode for several years now. We've been green for like, I'm kidding.
Oh yeah, and another example is like using like virtual backgrounds on these kind of meetings, right? That consumes much more CPU than not doing that. And because your computer's constantly trying to figure out where the edge of your body is, and is constantly moving that around. I don't do that anymore. In fact, I never did. I thought it looked weird, but now I will definitely not do that for a good reason, right?
Mm. Yeah, but Drew, you mentioned here that you moved your work to another server or data center, and in your presentation you talked about like carbon aware load shifting and some examples of that. Is that something you have done with like cron jobs, that you move them around to greener regions, or is it something that you're looking at?
So we don't actually do that. In fact, we don't usually move things between regions. But I read an article or a study, I believe, that was investigating like Kubernetes schedulers that does exactly that. Sort of like a load balancer, for example, that might direct traffic to sort of the greenest option. I think even recently I saw um, someone in Carbon Climate Action Tech was like experimenting with sort of a solar powered Raspberry Pi server, and one that was plugged in. And the load balancer would direct all the traffic to the solar one when it was available, right? And it's sort of the kind of just awareness built into a system um, that really can make big gains in sustainability just by getting creative. Right?
Yeah,
Similar,
and the cost, because it's
and the
much
cost,
much
absolutely.
cheaper to run stuff in a greener region. So
Yeah, and on the similar note, it's not just like physically where geographically, but like it's also when, right? Like certain times of day are greener than others in various locations, especially, solar is a great example of that. You can get solar power during the day quite easily with no storage. But as soon as you hit night, that energy is coming from somewhere else. So if you have workloads and you don't really care when it runs, it just needs to run once a day, run it when it's greener, right? It might be more expensive. That's another decision one needs to make, but at least thinking about that and as a trade-off, we can potentially make greener decisions.
Yeah, no, I think this is what, once we get to the point where, there's significant investment behind this, we can do a lot of cool stuff. I can't remember where I heard this or who talked about this. Might have even been you, Sophia. But like, for instance, streaming services. Um, that's a huge amount of data going over the wire, and it's going over the wire at night to your house, right? Because that's when you want to watch it. And still, you do have your favorites list or to watch list, or you're watching your favorite TV show on Netflix or HBO or whatever. So the likelihood of, the algorithm knowing what you're going to watch this evening are pretty high. So like preloading stuff to your house when, energy is greener and cheaper might actually be a good option to not like push stuff over the wire. But now, now that, if I give your engineering team that task, that's a significant engineering effort. So, now we need to have some incentive to back those engineering efforts. There are things we can do. We just need to be able to prioritize that innovation over innovation. Like if HBO and Netflix are fighting about getting viewers or retention metrics, this is not going to be at the top of their list of things to fix.
yeah, but as Drew said, what if the cost of ownership was in CO2 instead? Then it would be. So uh, if only we could have that. But
No,
maybe
but
if we have legislations, it will be.
no, I mean, I definitely think, if you want to push that to like the furthest level, you probably need like sustainability OKRs at the top level, because then, this is a constraint that your team should have when solving, the problems, the customer's problems. It's kind of the idea, like most customers won't ask for this as a feature because they simply don't know they want it. But when it's there, it's probably going to be great. So that's kind of the way I'm viewing it. And then it comes down to all this stuff. Like, we're a software consultancy, so of course the stuff we do with our clients has an impact on our clients' carbon footprint. But us ourselves as a company, that we run most of our stuff as software as a service products. We don't host that much things ourselves. There's really very little things we could do, but there are things with the people we can do. So, now it comes down to, where are you working from? Are you working from home? Are you working from the office? How do you commute to the office? Are you with the client? How do you commute to the client? How often do you have to go to the client? So there's all these other costs involved in running a software company as well. And when I say costs, I mean CO2 costs, um, that have to be calculated too, because you might figure out that actually commuting and better work from anywhere setups is a better investment than trying to figure out how to move containers between regions with a cron job. So I think is this holistic view we need to get to.
Yeah, and that whole, like moving workloads between things with cron jobs, like, sort of looking at it from the perspective of, the greenest thing is when it's not running at all, right? And and that's where we get into relatively common practice of like turning off things when they're not being used, and just sort of like the epitome of auto scaling. Um, as soon as this is configured in our Kubernetes clusters now, like non-production specifically, like off hours and weekends, those things just kind of go down to like nothing. And with the ability to be overridden, and someone comes in late or a weekend to do whatever they want because that's when they're most productive, it can come back up. But absolutely, just making sure we are, you know, focused on that, and have it in the back of our mind that, again, that's also a cost play, right? So in many cases, some of these are easily justifiable um, investments because we're going to actually have a direct cost savings from financial cost. Um, but by looking at it through the lens of sustainability, like those are huge wins as well.
And that's such an easy fix. It's just turning always on to off. So some things in the cloud are made so easy, like switching region, especially for your non-production stuff. You can switch to a greener region and have always on, off. I just love those choices that the cloud gives you. Because like if you had servers at your own company, that wouldn't be possible.
I mean, I think I just comes back to kind of maturity of your team. Like, we're talking about some of these things, like all teams are doing it. Like, all teams are working with DevOps. All teams have, container-based infrastructure as code environments that they can spin down and up, and there's no like magic hands that need to touch the environment. And the reality, for a lot of companies out there, is they're not even at that level. So telling somebody, you could turn this stuff off when you go home for the weekend and then put it back on a Monday, it's like, no, 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 that's going to take us one day just to get it up and running again. So there's no way we're turning it off. So I mean, there are a lot of these just like basic engineering practices that are assumed, but I think just getting there, and this is what I think is awesome when we talk about, are you sustainable technologists, is like just getting some of those basic engineering practices, getting those things into your company is gonna set you up for better success. And now you knew it was important before. Now you have yet another reason why it's important.
Yeah, and I think my favorite one of those sort of concepts is like designing for failure, right? Like, we, especially in the cloud, we expect servers to fail, period. At times, and therefore designing these resilient systems that will just allow that bad server to just go away and a new one come back in its place. Like that concept, applies all the way throughout this whole talk, really. It's the idea that enables auto scaling, right? We can spin up more of the things that we need and turn them off when they're not needed automatically because they come up and go away cleanly. It allows us to use spot instances, which are can potentially be yanked from us at any time without that much warning. That's okay if if the services themselves can kind of shut down cleanly and come back up somewhere else because Kubernetes said, oh, there's some space over there, so just keep running. So to me, that's one of my favorite sort of just catchphrases, I guess, but really applies directly to a lot of the engineering practices that allows this to happen.
Yeah. Another phrase I like, it comes from Asim Hussein, who's what is he? Green software engineering evangelist at AWS, or no, Azure, sorry. Yeah, he introduced me to like this concept of like always asking, how can we make this more sustainable? And that's a question anyone on the team can ask, or like as an organization. It's such a simple question. You don't even have to know how, you just put it out to the team. And if you always have that with you in every like refinement meeting or even higher up, when the business is thinking about adding a new feature, like, do we even need this? Or how can we make this sustainable? Can we have like some eco mode here, like you had with the Netflix example, Martin? Like, could we give the customer a choice to download his or her favorite shows? I could do that. Like it's already possible on iPad and iPhone to download stuff. So
yeah, we
it's
used
about
to.
product design and
I think you're right. Like, empowering everyone to ask that question is really important. And I'll sort of kind of talk about a little example. We used to, when we used to all be in the office together way back when, we had this, this sort of practice of, I would give people on our team, if they did something special or if they were given a shout out from someone else in the team, I'd give them a small Starbucks gift card. They can go use that card and go get go get a coffee somewhere. It's these plastic cards. I would go up to, load some money on these things, and I would hand out these plastic cards to everybody. Um, it worked well. It was exciting. People would get something. I read a little note in there. But then one of my principal engineers said, that's a lot of wasted plastic. They would go take these off the thing, would load some money on it. They put it on their Starbucks app, and then they throw the card away. And he said, there's got to be a way we can do this more sustainably, right? And he suggested I asked for those cards back after they're emptied, right? And we kind of created our own like little circularity program where I would have these like envelopes full of empty cards, and I would just go and reload them up, each time and reuse those cards over and over again. Which is a simple, smart question that one of our engineers asked, and just we made that change happen. It was as simple as that. And you take that and you just again you multiply it over and over again throughout an organization over time. These are pretty big differences in the end.
Yeah, I think we'll come back when we talk about product design. We come back to this idea of what is it for, and being super stubborn about that question when we get something that our team is asked to. It's like, all right, so what is it for? Who is it for? And what problem does it solve? And what is it for goes beyond your Starbucks gift card example. That's not for giving people money. That's to show appreciation. And there's like a token, and you wrote a note in there. So this is for making them feel special for doing something appreciated. That's what it's for. So the design process, the requirement can't be we want a way to give people money. The design process has to be we want something that makes people feel special and chosen and whatever. And I love this, I guess in Sweden, this is the Starbucks competitor, Espresso House, right? But what thing they have is in their app, you can from one app send a gift card to another app. But you can design a little card around and it opens up and there's like, thank you for something, something. And so that doesn't have to be like a physical thing, and it still makes you feel special. Like I know when I get that from my partner, when I'm traveling somewhere on business and you're standing at the airport. Yes, unfortunately, I still sometimes fly, and you get it, and it just like opens up and you go like, wow, it's just like it's just a small thing, right? And it doesn't have to be a physical card at all. And that's what I mean with have to, get past the barrier of this is what they asked me to do. I have to ask like, what is it for? Who is it for? Like, what's the purpose of this thing? Otherwise, we're going to end up missing the mark. But that way, we can actually push things better. And now we have an idea for what to put in the Starbucks app.
I think that's there.
We don't have that much Starbucks in Sweden.
It's coming. But about Starbucks, do you have like a plan moving forward? Like, what's the next step on your sustainability journey? I mean, within tech.
Yeah, I think what a lot of what I discussed today is not like all across tech. We have lots of other teams. I think that I would love to see this, sort of be more widely adopted across the org and even globally. Um, I think we have some new leadership recently, so we're going to learn a lot more about what's important, and I'm sure the mission is critical, and everyone will continue to believe strongly in. I do know that sustainability will continue to be a very important aspect, but kind of how these things roll out and when and with what priority, still remains to be seen.
But are there any like specific things you have in your backlog? Like, oh, okay, we want to move this there, and we want to optimize this because it's gonna give us a big carbon win.
Yeah, I think. Well, I think right now the sort of you've done a lot. You know, pretty kind of lean at the moment. I do think that some of there's some newer instance types that have been released, not too long ago, that we could take advantage of. Those are kind of easy wins, right? Although I think some of these workloads have not been fully tested on like sort of ARM architectures. So there's a bit of a just testing effort there. Um, I do think that there's just general simplification we can do, along the lines of getting rid of things. There's some changes we can make that will, add simplification, and will help us reduce some cost and of course get rid of some carbon at the same time. Um, so there's some things coming along those lines. Um, I do believe though that like from the getting lean and mean and green like from the very beginning, um, is really kind of the best way to continue to stay on top of it, right? And you never kind of let that get out. It's sort of like a tech debt, right? It gets out of hand and it becomes a massive effort to address. And then you ask the question: is it even worth it at that point? Like, can I just throw the whole thing away and get something else? Um, we don't want to be there ever, and so really kind of keeping a focus on it continually. It's not a project; it doesn't start and end. It's a continual operations, right? And it's keeping an eye on that total cost of ownership of the platform. Sometimes things change, costs go up, costs go down. We want to keep an eye on that at all times, um, and look for new opportunities to do that. I do think it'd be pretty cool to like find the right kind of Kubernetes balancer that will direct traffic to the greenest place. I don't think we're there yet, but that's a really neat concept.
Nice. And also, I was thinking about like in Starbucks' case, of course, you have your app, but that's, as you said, like 1% of your carbon footprint is from your technology. But for other companies who are like their product is technology, like streaming services. And while thinking about that, and also thinking about that, like roughly 75% of the digital footprint is produced by individuals, like consumers consuming and storing storing data somewhere, sending an email, streaming, backing up. So each digital move has a carbon footprint or uses energy. And like also like could you like speak your thoughts on that, on like whose responsibility is it, and think about how the tobacco industry did this, like whose responsibility is it?
Yeah, I like the, going back, if at least in the U.S. I don't know if this was as pervasive as it was in the U.S. and even earlier before my time, really. And I'm kind of old now, I think, but it was even before my time. But this concept of don't be a litter bug. Okay, um, and that was you know, people leaving trash all over the place, right? And this campaign was created to say, hey, don't be a litter bug, right? And putting the sort of onus on the end user, the consumer of something. And it turns out though that like that whole campaign was funded by, and I don't want to get it wrong, but like one of the manufacturers of a beverage that came in a can or plastic that was the thing that was being thrown away and not being recycled or something like that. Um, and so they basically took the approach that like once it leaves our store or our factory, it's no longer our responsibility, right? um, it's now the consumer's responsibility to make sure that it's disposed of properly, which I think is really kind of an insane way to think about it. You know yes, the consumer like has it in their possession at some point in time, but I do think it's up to those manufacturers to really understand the complete life cycle of the things they manufacture. They can't just make something and forget it, and it becomes part of the problem, right? We need to think about that. Where does it end up? Where does the thing we make end up in this world? And it's going to end up in you know some landfill? Is it going to be sent back to me and I can reuse the thing, right? Or some other company can potentially reuse that. um, and, definitely can't be the consumer that owns that responsibility solely. um, Anyway, it goes back to also why we're looking at these reusable cups, right? Um, if we don't give customers throwaway cups, they're not going to throw the cups away, right? And it's not we're forcing them to do things differently. We're creating an incentive. Um, there'll probably be maybe like a little initial charge, and you get a refund back or something like that. I'm not exactly sure how that will end up, but um, you want to create the incentives to do that. Just like bringing your own cup to Starbucks today in the U.S. You could always get 10 cents for doing that off your order. We recently launched where you can, in addition to that, you get 25 stars for the loyalty program, and that actually adds up really quick. I get like so many free drinks per week now.
No, I'm kind of with you, Drew. I think the problem with pushing some this responsibility onto the individual is that it's really hard to make an informed choice. Like, go back to the Netflix example. Like, if you downgrade your Netflix service, you get a cheaper, greener Netflix service because if you don't need HD or 4K or whatever, so you buy a cheaper Netflix one, it's cheaper and it's greener. But at the end, what you want is, if I have a 4K TV, I want the 4K streaming service. So pushing that responsibility on me, saying like, oh, well, do you really want to destroy the planet because you want 4K video? It's more about like, how can we make that better? But I can't make that better. Netflix has to make that better. Like, it's and so I think there's this like, where can you actually affect stuff? Of course, there's a lot of stuff I can do as an individual, including like live completely off the grid and grow my own food. Um, but like, where's the reasonability in that in the society we're trying to create? So I think there's a balance, but I don't think that uh, I don't think we can push too much of that responsibility onto the individual. but yeah, incentives are great. I mean, I think that from the perspective of what you were saying, as organizations, both incentivizing but also kind of making those choices the default. I went to, I don't want to like, can't remember what it was. Like your order default hamburger was a Beyond Burger, like the default one. You could still get the beef option, but you had to like specifically say, I would like the beef burger. And most people just didn't care enough to take that extra step to ask for the beef. They just ordered a hamburger and was a green burger every day. They ate the Beyond Burger and was like really happy with that. And I think that's interesting because if the default was the beef, I'm pretty sure that they would have sold a lot more beef burgers.
No issue with my sound. Hope you can hear me again. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. And also, like, that's the consumer, but also as a company or as a software developer, or someone who uses cloud services. I've seen that cloud providers, they describe their carbon emissions, or like the carbon emissions that you will produce by using their services, as scope 3 emissions. And that basically means that if I use cloud, it's not my direct emissions. It's like the emissions furthest away from me. And I'm a bit like confused about that, because if I would have those services in-house, those would be my direct emissions. But by moving them out, I don't have to take as much responsibility for it. And we say like, yeah, but now it's up to AWS to solve that for me. They need to build super efficient data centers, because I don't want to handle that, because I pay for it.
I think that comes down to like that sort of shared responsibility. You've probably seen that graphic that Amazon tends to share around security, right? How do you secure your workloads in the cloud? It's hosted at Amazon. It's their responsibility to make sure it's secure. But no, we all share in that responsibility. They secure the infrastructure, they secure the network around it, but we need to make sure the software we write and deploy there is also secure. And the same thing goes for sustainability. They're going to do their best. All the cloud providers will do their best to continue to optimize their infrastructure, make greener data centers, use more renewable energy. But we're still deploying services there, and they're our services, and they're going to consume energy, right? And so we have an opportunity and really more an obligation to make sure we're doing that responsibly. And I think it's good to have it shared. And it's that the different scopes are important to understand. There's differences in how and who's responsible and who, like how it's counted and so forth. But the reality is we need both organizations, the cloud provider and the engineering firm who's deploying services on that cloud, to take responsibility for the things they have control over.
Mm. Yeah. And also, Drew, you spoiled the secret, but I saw it on the news too. Because like every time I speak on this topic about green software, someone always brings up the question about blockchain or crypto mining. And that's a relevant question, of course. I read somewhere that Bitcoin consumes as much energy as a country size of Finland. So it's super relevant. And so I read and heard from you that Starbucks will be releasing their own NFTs. So I'd like to hear your thoughts about like how can you make it sustainable, or anyone like that is asking the question about blockchain technologies.
Yeah, that really is a great question. And admittedly, that announcement, was, surprising to me and to many of us. But I do think that, it's really important for us all um, to look at these things and really take into account what opportunities they present us. And, with regard to, and I sort of can't speak specifically about Starbucks, but if an organization wanted to get into, NFTs, for example, um, and they also believed heavily that sustainability is an important aspect of their values, um, they're not necessarily incompatible. Like the de facto, maybe default way to do it maybe is, but there's opportunities. There's greener blockchains that exist. They don't have the reach today. They don't have as many, um, you know, nearly as many sort of nodes in those chains as the more popular ones do. But they're getting greener. There's new alternatives available that one could use, and be significantly less, sort of energy polluting. And so you can look at all those different options. I think in addition to, like, hand in hand with like the energies, like, like who are these benefiting in the first place? Like, I think it's also important to look at, it's not just for like the really wealthy people to play with these like digital toys. Um, we might think of it that way, but there's no reason why we couldn't, like, drive a marketplace a different direction. Ensuring accessibility to everybody, and doing it in a way that's really in line with that company's sort of mission and values. And um, it's not easy, right? The simple thing to do is just to kind of make it dirty, right? But if we look at it as an opportunity, we can potentially like change the industry around it, if that was, the where we wanted to sort of place investments and so forth.
I think this is like a super interesting topic. I mean, in the end, it comes down to, again, what's the problem we're trying to solve? Like, why, when Starbucks wants to launch an NFT, or any organization, like, let's talk generally about it, wants to launch an NFT, why are they doing that? Like, what's the purpose? What is it for? And then you can see, what's the technology that needs to back this? I mean, blockchains, hash chains, we've had that for like tons of years. Like, that's not new tech. And we should pick tech, that purposefully solves the problem we're trying to solve. And today, a lot of the hype around blockchains and NFTs and everything is like a technology first driven hype. So we don't look at the problem first. And if we would look at the problem, there would probably be better ways of implementing that and solving that, in ways that would give similar or same benefits, whether that is the distribution, a distribution of data, or that's the aspect of securing ownership, or if it's the aspect of being ever present, so to say, persistent, in a sense that lives beyond the organization. So depending on what aspect of the technology your problem needs, there are different ways of solving it that might function. So not necessarily saying that blockchain is our solution to whatever we want to do, but like figure out what you want to do and then see what technology supports that. And you might end up inventing, a new chain called something else, which is greener and better. I think that if you look at where we are right now with those technologies specifically, we're like, I think we're still riding this hype cycle wave. Like, nobody knows what it's for. And the best example I have of this was when iPhone apps were published. Like, the first apps you would get, except for ones that ship with your phone, was the app which you could push a button and it would fart, and the other one was a beer and you could drink the beer. And it's like, everybody looked at that. Companies looked at that and it's like, that's stupid. Like, nobody is ever going to need an app. We have web pages. Like, why would you ever build an app? And now you look at how prevalent apps are, and what's going on in that space. And I think that's what's going on. Like we're doing so much stupid things with blockchains and NFTs and everything. So anybody looking at it says, yeah, like, Ponzi scheme, bad for the environment, stupid. But in there somewhere under all those layers of stupidity, there's, something that might be useful. But we need to start from the problem. We can't start from the technology.
Hmm. And so there's not much time left. So I'm thinking that we'll move on to the questions that we received from the chat. So if you have any questions now, please pop them in the chat. So starting with the first one. How do you prevent the risk of greenwashing? Maybe Drew,
Yeah.
could.
Yeah, that's a really good question. I think that it's always a risk, but I think when it's sort of in line with a company's actual mission and values, and there's big commitments made to actually um, you know moving things forward, and a company has a history of making promises, succeeding on most of those promises, certainly not all. But really trying to do the right thing. Um, it's something we can actually believe in, and I think it takes time. Lots of companies want to, you know, everyone says that they want to be as sustainable as they can be, and it's going to ultimately take time to see who does and who doesn't. And it's not easy for everyone to suddenly pivot and change. There's lots of momentum behind kind of the old ways of thinking, and not realizing um, that we can actually, the work we do has harmful side effects, right?
Greenwashing is not good, but it's not necessarily bad. So hear me out on this. So the best thing is to act, is to do something. But the second best thing is to put your brand and your company behind a cause, even if you're yourself not doing something. So if a big mega corporation goes and says like, oh, green stuff, everything, that affects people. That gets the message out. It would be better if they actually did something, but them getting behind the message, getting behind the cause, even if they're not doing anything, it still has an impact. So sure. I mean, preventing greenwashing is hard, I think, because that means we need transparency and probably legislation and stuff like that. But if somebody just doing this, putting their brand behind the cause, is not always necessarily bad for the cause itself. So I don't know. That's just maybe controversial.
Mm. I agree with you both. It's really powerful when someone famous goes out and says they're vegan, but really they eat meat sometimes. It affects people. Yeah. So on to the next question. In aviation, the end users pay part of the climate footprint. Could you see a future where this happens in some way in IT?
Um, I think we all love seeing those kind of surcharges on our airplane tickets. Um, it's possible, it's possible. I think again, if you, I really do tend to think of carbon as a cost, right? And just like most businesses, certain costs are passed on to the customers, whether that be just higher prices or taxes or surcharges or something like that. Um, I, in cases where you want to enable customers or incent them um, to make certain choices, right? Like the greener choice or the less green choice. Making it an actual financial cost is a great way to do that.
I mean, what's that for? Let's just be real. Why is that surcharge there on your airplane ticket? It's not that, you're paying that. If they just wanted, they bake so much stuff into the airplane fare that they could have baked that into the fare as well. The reason they put it on there is because they're trying to convince you that you're making a sustainable choice by flying. So the reason that surcharge is there is simply to ease the mind of the consumer of the airplane ticket. So because they're right now in an industry which is in the hot air because of emissions. So you really need to think about like what's, of course everything is going to be pushed to the consumer in the end. Like you're going to be paying for everything in the end. But like, does it make sense for services to kind of put that out there as a separate cost? Well, only if you're trying to influence your users to keep using your service and tell them it's not as bad as it looks, because look, you actually paid to make it better. Like you have a clean conscience now. So I don't know. I think that's a weird question because first of all, you need to understand what actually the airlines are doing with those types of charges. And it's not really about the charge, it's about swaying the minds of the consumers.
That's greenwashing, right? I think that's a good example of it. You don't
But
think it's
that's a
greenwashing, but
level
it is.
that's a level beyond greenwashing, because that's actually manipulation to get you to pick the airplane next time again. Because like I paid a sustainability charge, so it's okay, right? So it's like it's not even greenwashing, like we're doing a good job. It's like telling you, the consumer that's flying, like you're doing a good job, like you're awesome. That's manipulation.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't like that at all. Like, but it's you who are choosing to fly with us. We didn't ask you. All right. We'll take the next one. Are you expecting regulations and directions from governments or other instances to regulate emissions created by infrastructure and software? Maybe we can answer from the US perspective first.
I think we'll probably end up there. I know right now they're already considering, looking at publicly traded companies and how they report on their ESG data. Um, and that's sort of the kind of regulation I hear most frequently these days. I think a lot of that, all the work that we do, kind of bubbled up into that. Um, but I do think that ultimately it's going to have to be a little bit more, um, sort of standardized on how companies are going to be asked to report and then show improvements over time. Um, so I do think that's eventually coming. I just don't know when.
Mm. And Martin, what do you think about Europe? Because I guess those are like 1 year, 2 years apart.
Hmm. I, I'm gonna be honest here. I'm not super read up on everything that's going on right now. I have talked to some companies that are building software for basically tracking like organizations' emissions, and also inside of that software automatically building up compensations programs for those emissions. And that includes everything from IT infrastructure, cloud environments, but also what we talked before, personnel, traveling, commuting, and all that stuff. And these companies believe that, this is right around the corner. So they're betting their whole business on that, because their customers today are only the ones that want to do better, but they're betting their whole business on that this is going to be mandatory in just a few years. So, given that kind of anecdotal evidence, I do believe that there's stuff coming. And if there, at least I'm hoping for it, because it's like with the GDPR stuff, like the thing that GDPR did for our industry is that this became a topic on, in the requirements process, in the ordering process, in the building process. Every client we talk to just goes like, oh, so what about the GDPR stuff? Before that happened, nobody talked about data protection and security. So all of a sudden, it became this subject. So I think if we get those regulations in place, it's going to be easier for us as software professionals to do a good job, because we can say, well, look, like there's legislation, there's rules around this, you have to follow.
Yeah, I think it's coming, at least for some businesses, some types of companies, that they will have to report their emissions. And like a software engineer, I think, yeah, I want that future, because then we can come in and just say, ah, we can reduce your emissions by 1% just by switching region, like where you're hosting your products, and lots of stuff that is much easier to do than, having them to switch out all their cars to electric cars, or change their ways of working completely. I'm looking forward to that. And next question is, any specific resources that a technologist could use to learn more about this?
Yeah, well, I think a great start is maybe join climateaction.tech community. There are so many helpful people there on all sorts of topics. There's a sort of Slack channel on just about anything you can think of regarding sustainability and technology, um, and very helpful people. I mean, you throw out a question and you're going to get some answers. Um, there's all sorts of tools, for measuring different parts, and I think it's important to, like, depending on what kind of area your job is focused on, whether it be like back-end server code, or, client-facing things, or even like a network engineer, like, there's different tools and different ways of thinking about that and different ways of measuring. Um, but some of the ones that I had sort of mentioned, I think, earlier in the talk, were, things like, website carbon.com. It's a really neat tool. You give it a URL and it will report back on sort of, is it hosted on green energy, and like, is the sort of, you know basically how much carbon is emitted every time you hit that page, right? And this is immediate, like, education when you see that, and it's like, ooh, yeah, maybe I need to do something that can fix this, or I need to focus on this. And other ones like, EcoGrader and EcoPing, other two that are out there that do similar things but go into sort of different levels of detail. Um, EcoPing will monitor sites over time, continually pinging these things, and report back. And it goes, some of these reports you can get back from these services are, really insightful. It's not just, you know, the high level carbon footprint of a site, but also, like, looking at the, performance, and kind of aggregating a bunch of different tools together to show, and it's just looking at those reports to see each one of those areas are areas where one could optimize. Um, and of course, as I mentioned before, is Tom Greenwood's book, Sustainable Web Design, and that's a real, it's a very high level, it's skinny book, which means it's going to get read, right? So that's also a great place to look at and get started.
Yeah, EcoPing is really great. I recommend that myself, because it gives you like real tips on how to solve your issues, not just, oh yeah, this is how much you emit. They have really good insights. But that was our last question. We don't have time for more. So thank you so much, Drew, for coming and joining us in the middle of the night. And thank you so much, Martin, for joining us as well. And thank you for everyone who has been listening today. If you want to catch this again or send to anyone else, this will be up on our YouTube channel. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Sofia and Martin.